Hi, Mr. Aguadala. This is Rita, and I'm going to go over the bones of the skull. I, of course, have the list here, and I'm going to run down the top 25 or 30 bones that you have listed here. To start with, of course, there's the frontal bone, the parietal bones, and the occipital bone, as well as the temporal bone. To talk about some sutures, the frontal bone is separated from the parietal bones by the coronal suture. The parietal bones are separated by the sagittal suture, and the occipital bone is separated from the parietal bones by the lambdoid suture. The temporal bone has a suture above it that's called the squamous suture. And then there is the sphenoid bone. To turn around to the front of the face, to look at the face of the skull, the two nasal bones connect with the frontal bone, and these form the bridge of the nose and help form the nose. There's a maxilla bone here. There is the mandible bone, and the mandible bone, there's the mental foramen, the two holes here on the front. There's the mandibular ramus, the mandibular body. There's the mandibular condyle. The condyle articulates with the skull at the mandibular fossa. There's the zygomatic bone. The zygomatic bone is our cheekbone, and the zygomatic bone has a process as well as the temporal bone has a process. The zygomatic bone's process is called the temporal process of the zygomatic bone, and the temporal process is called the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. I hope I said that right. Let me just say that again just to make sure. The zygomatic bone has a process, and it's called the temporal process of the zygomatic bone, and the temporal bone's process is called the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. And together they form the zygomatic arch. Just to go back over to the temporal bone again, there's a process here called the mastoid process, and right in front of it there's another process called the styloid process. Additionally, there's a canal here that's called the external acoustic meatus. Let me just see if there's anything else. Oh, if you look at the nasal cavity here, there's the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, and then there's the vomer. And inside the orbit of the eye here, on the side of the orbit, is the lacrimal bone. Let's see if there's anything else on the front of this page that I wanted to go over. There's a couple of foramen on the front of the face that I'd like to talk about. Foramen on the front of the face. There's the top two foramen here called the supraorbital foramen, and the lower two here are called the infraorbital foramen. Inside the orbit of the eye, you can see a couple of fissures. There's a superior and an inferior. This is the superior orbital fissure, and this is the inferior orbital fissure. And way in the back, you can see the optic canal. I already discussed the vomer bone. This is the glabella. And I thought that was rather interesting in one of the videos where we saw the glabella as a section on the front of your face that doesn't have any hair, so that's easy to remember. And just a couple of other bones that I find very interesting that I wanted to just go ahead and talk about. When you look inside the skull here, the ethmoid bone comes out, and on the crest of the ethmoid bone is the crista galli. And on the side of the crista galli, kind of down in there, is the cribiform plate. And I find that a very interesting bone, as well as the area where the pituitary gland sits. I find that's a very interesting structure because that's its primary function is to protect and have an area for the pituitary gland to sit, and that's called the sella turcica. In addition, these two holes here are where the optic canal comes through the eye. So I think that's probably at least 25 of the bones, maybe a little bit more. And of course, I'll see you Tuesday. Thanks.